5-MeO-DMT from Bufo Alvarius Secretion, LSD and P-cyanescence followed by 4-ACO-DMT and P-cyanescence. An opportunity presented itself to partake of Bufo Alvarius Secretion, as we know, a rich source of 5-MeO-DMT, and I decided I wanted to experience this. This would be under the supervision of an MD, someone with a great deal of experience administering DOD secretion/5-MeO. Just the once, and for a full release dose, I was happy to experience this under the supervision of a doctor and someone with a great deal of experience in overseeing sessions. I knew of him and his work with the TOD as some friends had published his book and gave me a free copy to read and review. I had a very brief exchange with him over Facebook which had been cordial, and having read his book, he came across as an affable guy, maybe with a slightly inflated ego. A good friend had seen him give a talk a few days prior to my session and had been fascinated by his talk, but said that during the Q&A afterwards, his ego seemed to come out a bit, something I had noticed a bit in his writing. I do think psychedelics can actually build up egos over time, and in some people it causes a kind of God/Messiah complex. It may be that 5-MeO is a little more prone to this, I'm not sure. So, my session, I found myself wandering through an industrial part of northeast London. I was excited and a little nervous. I had come down on the train to London the night before, and had been reading James Orrock's fascinating book Tryptamine Palace on the way down. In it, Orrock stated that 5-MeO taken before another psychedelic can dramatically boost its effects. He also stated that it worked the other way around, with being on a psychedelic boosting the power of 5-MeO. Based on this, I decided to ingest a 10 microgram LSD blotter, these having been used for microdosing purposes, and 2 small dried psilocybe cyanescens mushrooms. I'm not sure 5-MeO needs any augmentation in terms of power, but I didn't want to miss out on the opportunity of going deep. I finally found 2 barge boats, on which people had gathered in preparation for the session. A small friendly group was in there, including the host and a good friend, and I felt comfortable on arrival. The other barge next to this one had been kitted out and made cozy for the sessions, which were conducted in a one-on-one context on a bunk in there. The doctor briefed us on how to smoke the vapor correctly, by breathing out, and then inhaling the fumes gently from the glass pipe until he said, then putting a hand over one's mouth, and counting to 10 while lying down. Everyone who went before me and came out seemed to be in a state of awe, with a sparkle in their eyes. One person had been in tears. My friend went before me, and she came out with a very glowing testimonial, an experience of pure love. She is an atheist and a highly rational person, but she said that experience had challenged her views to some degree, not that she was now a believer or anything, but the experience had certainly been very deep, moving and profound. It was my turn, so I hopped on over to the other boat. I started to feel more nervous, which reached a crescendo with my heart racing before I smoked the vapor. The doctor had an assistant, a lovely girl, and both made sure I was comfortable and we held hands and did a prayer before I smoked. Then he lit the flame under the pipe, and I started to inhale. I made sure to do it slowly, being careful not to waste any vapor. When I was done inhaling, I placed my hands over my mouth as instructed, lay down in the bunk, and started to count to 10. I'm not sure what number I made it to, but I certainly didn't make 10. There was a dramatic break or shift in my awareness, and I lost all contact with the barge, with London, with my body and this reality. My entire being was enveloped in this vast realm of bright white/golden light, which I was flying through. I know 5-MeO isn't considered very visual compared to DMT, and certainly DMT is more visually complex, but this was still a dramatically visionary experience. My sense of individual self, of my isness was obliterated, but some kind of awareness remained, experiencing flying through this realm of light. I find the 5-MeO experience incredibly hard to describe in words. The experience is, or occurs in, a state so far beyond the realm of words, that it is really hard to communicate the state or its profundity in any tangible way. The state of consciousness I experienced felt very deep, profound and quite sacred. Sacred is not a word I'm prone to use. I appreciate how subjective it is, but this experience felt profound in a way I simply cannot describe in words. I have dabbled previously with 5-MeO, but those experiences could not hold up the faintest candle to this experience, in terms of its depth and power. There was a bit of fear for some time, due to the sheer raw power of the experience. I would consider this more powerful than my DMT breakthrough experience. In the latter, there was still a sense of experiencing and observing, even if I had lost contact with my body and environment. On the 5-MeO, even the observing I had been lost in the mix. I really can't say how long the experience lasted, linear time does not apply to that space. But it seemed like a decent amount of time. When I started to come back, I finally opened my eyes and looked at the skylight of the barge, and saw a tiny fly buzzing around up there. I knew I was back. I felt supremely relaxed once I became aware of my body again, and the post-experience afterglow state was very warm and comforting. I smiled, sat up and caught the eyes of the doctor and his assistant and laughed. He smiled and nodded, and soon after I burst into tears briefly. It is not like me to cry in the midst of or following psychedelic experiences, and I can't really explain why I did on this occasion, only that I was overwhelmed with the power, profundity and beauty of what I had just experienced. The guys hugged me, and I hugged them both back, and then joined the collective of people in the barge next door, still very awed about what I had just been through. Shortly after I left with my friend and went and had some nice food and chats. It was nice to reflect on the experience with a friend, even though we both really struggled to describe, let alone explain, what we had both just been through. Later that night, I linked up with some friends to have a psychedelic session, and 2-hour-long sessions in a flotation tank, my first time floating. We all dosed with a capsule of 4-ACO-DMT, and some of us nibbled a few psilocybin mushrooms on the side. The trip setting was a little strange, in terms of people vibes. One guy there was clearly there to get high on whatever was to hand, and chat and laugh. He had a really restless energy. Another guy was also restless, but going through some deep stuff. One of the other guys was on good form and wanting to chat, but getting distracted by these other two restless characters. My other friend in hindsight regrets taking mushrooms/4-ACO in that environment. He has been enjoying solo trips with mushrooms I have provided him with, for the purposes of therapy, and he feels he missed out on a therapy session by consuming the mushrooms in this setting. I had thought the setting would be much more calm and sedate than it turned out to be. I'd assumed we'd all be floating. I made the most of the opportunity, and had 2-hour-long float sessions. I had one while coming up on my 4-ACO/mushroom mix. It took me around half the float session to really get comfortable, and when I had started to get comfortable, I had started to come up, with the darkness of the tank getting ever brighter with lights and colors, and the visionary spaces starting to open up. By the time I got out, I was feeling very calm and zen, and this affected the rest of my trip. While other peeps seemed quite restless, I felt very calm and serene. I was happy to sit down with legs crossed and eyes closed, chatting occasionally, more so as the night wore on. But happy to pay attention to what was unfolding in my inner space. One of the guys commented that I was a rock. I think partly I wasn't in a good space due to floating, but partly also due to the profound difference in experiential magnitude between a release dose of 5-MeU and the 4-ACO/mushrooms. The latter just felt so easygoing and light in comparison. It was interesting, but as the night wore on, I noticed that I was increasingly accessing the state of light I experienced earlier in the day on the 5-MeU. And my trip seemed to be deepening at the same time. I had another float session, and got more out of this one. I was in the zone from the outset, and it was nice being able to pay attention to my inner state without the distractions of other people. I really enjoyed the experience of floating. When I stretched out I could look behind myself, and it felt a lot like how I imagined being weightless in space must feel like. I felt refreshed and serene on getting out. I would definitely be intrigued to combine flotation with psychedelic experiences in the future, and would be interested in longer float sessions too. Finally, around 6 in the morning following a day of deep psychedelic consciousness exploration, it's finally bedtime, and as I drop off to sleep on my friend's couch, several times I find myself powerfully launching into the 5-MeU state. At the time, this was fleetingly scary, as I felt my awareness dramatically shifting quite suddenly. Although it was primarily really interesting, it never lasted long, seemed to occur on the boundary of waking and sleeping, but I have never experienced anything this vivid before. I have certainly experienced DMT and 5-MeU-inspired dreams after having used both, but I've not had such vivid experiences of re-entering the 5-MeU state in partial waking consciousness, so long after the event. I've heard that there can be 5-MeU reactivation for some time after one's initial experience, such as during meditation, following breathwork or when dreaming, and also that one can gain access to the 5-MeU state when using other psychedelics, which after my experiences doesn't come as much of a surprise. I would definitely consider this experience with 5-MeU as one of my all-time peak life experiences, but also the hardest for me to explain why this is the case, up there with my DMT breakthrough, my first time with Iboga, and a few others. I would rate this experience as my most powerful. The release dose of experience of 5-MeU, going by my reading on these things, seemed to have more in common with a near-death experience than a traditional psychedelic experience in some respects, and its power should in no way be underestimated. Without a doubt this is some heavy-duty stuff. It should not be entered into lightly, and it is certainly not a recreational substance at these dosages. I do however feel very lucky to have experienced this. It's truly wondrous and amazing what a human being can experience.